everybody. So, my goodness. Okay. So it's right around the time of Samhain and All Souls Day and Dia de los Muertos. And so it just happened to be when Ken asked me to speak and I was available. So I spoke on this topic generally a couple years ago, right at this time. So it's very synchronistic. How many of you know about the boarding school, the native boarding school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania? Okay, for those who don't, and for future people who watch, Carlisle is near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and it was the site of one of the largest and most infamous of the native boarding schools. And so there was this policy for about 100 years where our government, I guess they decided we don't feel right about outright killing the native people anymore, but we are going to try our best to convert them and assimilate them. And the way they did that was they forcibly removed children from their homes and their families and put them in these schools where they would be theoretically taught, but mostly the intention was just to take away all traces of their indigenous culture. They weren't allowed to speak the language. They weren't allowed to dress in traditional wear. They weren't allowed to practice any of their traditions. And I'm sorry to say it was pretty brutal by all reports. They were pretty brutal. There was a lot of abuse. So that's the hardest part of this talk. There's another hard part, but there's going to be some uplifting stuff. So I want to tell you good stuff has happened. So for 3 years, 3 different times rather, I went to Carlisle to offer prayers. And a few years ago, I had learned that when people die violently or suddenly or traumatically, that oftentimes their spirit gets stuck on the denser planes close to the earth. And they have difficulty ascending to the healing realms, to heaven, to whatever you want to call it. They have trouble and they need our help. And so that was my intention, to kind of help. In my ministry school, there was an elder, a Cherokee elder, who taught us about psychopomp work, which is going into the spirit world and helping to usher the spirits onto the light. So I did my best to do that, but because I have very new, not fully developed clairaudient, clairvoyant skills, I never really could tell how well I did. All right, so we're going to fast forward to this past summer when I decided to return to Etowah Mounds. And Etowah Mounds, they're earth mounds in Georgia. Are you familiar with earth mounds by any chance? Okay, we don't learn about them in school. These are 1,000 to 2,000-year-old mounds, sometimes more, that were created from the earth, just mounded earth in the shape of hills or flat-topped pyramids, and sometimes in the shape of animals. And there's literally thousands in this country, and we do not learn about them in school. What is that about? Like it's our history starts when this guy accidentally stumbled onto our shores. But there's this powerful history beforehand that we just don't learn about. That's where my passion lies. So there's many of these earth mounds, and Etowah is one of the largest in the southeast part of this country. There's 2 that are quite large. And of course, they're all covered with vegetation. And some of them now are maintained mode, and some are just too big and too steep, and they just have bushes and whatever, grass and trees. Okay, so when I go to these sites, I like to, besides reading the signs, I like to just circumambulate the mound. And I'll walk around a couple times, ideally 4 times. I got there late in the day. I only had time to do 2 before they closed. But my second time walking around, about halfway through, there was this big wind that blew through. And I hadn't noticed wind any of the rest of the day. It was very noticeable wind. And so I said to myself, this feels like a sign. What was I just thinking about? And what I was thinking about was this, and it wasn't the first time. There are mysteries associated with the mounds. Who really built them? What were they for? and there's mysteries associated with some of these other sites that I visit. And the feeling I had was, the historians and the archaeologists make these educated guesses about how they were built, why they were built, who built them. And they do the best they can based on their knowledge and their intuition, whatever. And my guess is many of them, they're very academically oriented. Some are spiritual, some might consult with Native Americans, but they might not be able to think outside the box necessarily. And so I thought we should employ mediums and psychics to help us learn the mysteries. We can talk to the people who built them or who lived there. We can go to the horse's mouth. That's exciting for me. I coined the term archaeopsychism. So when I came back from that trip, a few weeks later, I called Connie Bell Dixon, who is a gifted psychic medium, and she's there on Zoom. You can wave, Connie. And I asked if she'd be willing to do this, and I sent her ahead of time 20 or 30 photos so that she could gather her impressions when we met on a Zoom session. And there was so much information coming through. Normally she might be a medium for one person. She was a medium for 20 different sites. It was exhausting for her, I'm sure. So we ended up having 3 sessions. All right, we're going to put that aside. And now I'm going to tell you the official first story. After this most recent trip, I returned to Carlisle for the 3rd time. And the minister at Pebble Hill is a friend of mine. And she asked if I would speak about Carlisle there. And I said I'd be glad to, but I really wanted to do a ritual, which she was very excited about. And I said, I wanted to have a psychic medium there also. And I had suggested one person who wasn't available. So her assistant suggested John Toth, who you may remember being here about a year ago. He was the table tipping medium. And really, really gifted and wonderful person. And he agreed to come. And my goodness, you guys, it was so amazing. So the talk was fine. But then when we were doing the ritual, I drummed in all the directions. And no, I have to back up. Before any sacred event, I like to offer prayers outside, call in the spirits, set the intention, start to create the sacred container. So I asked John and Rosalind, the minister, and her assistant, Debbie, and me, we gathered outside to offer prayers and invoke the spirits. We just prayed for maybe 3 minutes. And then I turned to John and said, do you have anything to add? I did not expect this. He said, the spirits are already gathering out in that yard there. We could see the yard. But he said, they have a fire going and they're dancing. They're already preparing for what's ahead. And there was joy because they knew what was about. They knew what was unfolding. They heard our prayers. They knew what was being prepared. So that was the first thing that was cool. The second thing, I have to tell you how the room was set up. I felt guided. Okay. I felt guided to do the chairs in circles. So we had 2 concentric circles with openings in each of the 4 directions, which, as you might realize, is a native thing to do, right? I sat in one opening. John was in the opposite opening. And then there were 2 openings that were open. And so I began the ritual with drumming in all the directions and with reiterating what our intention was. And I began inviting in the spirits of the children who died at Carlisle. There are 180 kids buried in the cemetery there. And then there are most likely unmarked graves as well. When I was in the Cherokee Museum in North Carolina, I had the blessing of talking with 4 different traditional young people. And the subject of Carlisle came up quickly when the guy asked where I was from, and I said, Pennsylvania. And he said, oh, my grandmother went to school there. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he said, so you know. And I said, and the woman said, I believe there are unmarked graves there and at many of these places. So I asked Connie, and she confirmed that that was so. So I think that in the past I had helped a few of the children, but the goal was to help all of them. And so during that ritual, we invited in the children who went to Carlisle, all those children. And we also invited in all these native elders and spirits and ancestors to be there with us also. We just invited in a whole bunch of helpers in the spirit world. And then I have a pattern of feeling like I need to figure it all out and do it all exactly right myself. And what was the blessing was John was there, and I turned to him and I said, John, can you tell us what you're perceiving right now? So this is where it gets really beautiful. In the center of the circle was a round table with an altar. He said, on this side, there are chiefs have gathered, and there are men drumming. And then on this, where the opening is that was going out to that side yard that I mentioned, he said, the spirits are lined up on both sides of that aisle. They're forming this corridor, and walking in the middle were the children, each holding the hand of a woman. So the aunties and the abuelas and the mothers, the women were each holding the hand of a child so they wouldn't be alone, so they would feel safe. And these, while we were gathered and praying and John was talking, hundreds of them were coming up this aisle. And when they got into the center, he said there was this column of light, and one by one, they were lifted into the light. Hundreds of children. And he said, not just the kids who had died traumatically, but also some who needed healing because they were holding the shame of all the abuse that had happened. What did I do to cause this? You know, there was all this, they were taken away from their family so early that they didn't, you know, their self-worth was not there, you know, because they were just battered by these people in so many ways. So all those children came through too. There were all these children that came through and were touched and were taken up. And what was a powerful lesson for me was that I believe to help these spirits, we need people on the physical plane to create the container and set the intention. Thank you. And set the intention. And then we have to invite in all these spirits because they knew what to do. They knew what to do. These were their babies. These were their children. These were their relatives. They knew how to help them. And I didn't have to know what to do. We didn't have to know what to do. We just had to create the container. So that's my first happy story. And I think I'm on time. All right, so another story I want to share is about a different group of people who need our help. When I was going down to Florida, I did some research. Where should I go? What should I do? What can I visit? How can I help? I found out about this town called Rosewood. Do any of you know that town? There's a movie about it. So some of you might be able to find out more. Rosewood was this town in Florida where there had been a pencil industry where they created pencils. And there was a very large community of middle-class Black Americans. And they lived in the town of Rosewood. This whole town was people of color, except for one white family owned one of the general stores. Well, you know, for a while, everything was beautiful. They had Oh yeah, thank you, Susan. There's a big thing here. You can take notes if there's something that sticks with you, you can write it down and keep that. They had beautiful homes, they were painted, they had gardens, they had roses. From all reports, it was really a beautiful place to live. And then this incident happened. This was 100 years ago, 1923, I believe. There was a Black man who was going through a nearby town, and he was thirsty, and he asked this woman for something to drink, and she invited him in for lemonade. She was a white woman, he was a Black woman. And the story goes, what you'll find if you research this or if you go to the plaque at the site, is that she claimed she was attacked, and the sheriff came to investigate, and her husband raised holy hell, gathered up this huge militia of white men. There was a nearby convention of the KKK, and they got involved, and they basically invaded the town, were killing everyone they could find, burning down the houses. It was a horrible, horrible thing. When I read that, it didn't ring true for me. Not what had happened, but the cause of what had happened. Because any Black man would know if they attacked a woman, it would be a death sentence. This was the South, they get lynched for far lesser crimes than that. No one in their right mind would have done that. And so it never rang true. And what I intuitively was getting was that the husband was abusing her. The bruises on her body were from her husband. So this was one of many, many, many questions I asked Connie. And I said, can you check to see what really happened? And so she was able to tune into this woman whose name was Fanny. And Fanny came through, but she said, I don't want to talk with you. You're going to judge me. You're going to judge me. I mean, she knew that what happened as a result of her accusation resulted in a lot of deaths. And she knew that. And she didn't want to talk to us, but we convinced her that we wanted to hear her side of the story. And I said, we come in peace. And so eventually she felt safe enough to tell the story. And what happened was, she did confirm eventually that it was not only her husband, but her father and her brother that abused her. And she said this was pretty typical at the time, but that was all she knew was abuse. All the men in her life were abusing her. This man, this Black man that came for a drink, was the only man that had been nice to her. He was the nice man. And it scared her. She wasn't used to someone being nice. What did he want? Was he after something? And so she ran screaming out of the house. She never accused him of rape, but everybody, of course, thought that happened too. So long story short, Connie and I were both saying, we're so sorry this happened to you. We're so sorry all this happened to you. And she said, it wasn't fun, but it just was life. She said, it's not as bad as what happened to all these people. She carried so much guilt and shame for what had happened to all the people of Rosewood. So Fanny was still in that dense plane. She hadn't ascended. She felt too much guilt. And so Connie was able to help her get to the light, to guide her. First of all, she had to say, Fanny, you're dead. I don't know if you know that, but you've died. And a lot of them don't know. And then she said, now I want you to look over here. Do you see some light? And she said, yes. And Connie said, you need to go to the light. That's the place where you can go to find healing. And long story short, Fanny was able to go to the light. However, thank you, perfect. However, there's a lot of people there that still are stuck, a lot of spirits. And Connie said, not just the people of color, but actually some of the KKK are stuck too. I'm sure they feel, I don't know if they feel the guilt or what, but for whatever reason, they also are stuck. I've been feeling this weight of, I need to help them. I haven't done it yet. There's a list, there's a long list of spirits that need help. I feel this huge responsibility to help them. One of the reasons I'm telling you this is, one, so we realize that it's not just the underdogs that need our help, the perpetrators need help too. And it's not my first go-to when I go to these places. I'm not particularly excited about helping the white people, but I realize that everybody needs help because everybody needs to continue their evolutionary journey. Everybody needs to ascend. And when one person ascends, the whole collective is helped, right? Everybody goes a little lighter when someone goes up. And not just the people, but the earth herself doesn't have all this weight and darkness because people are rising. So there's this ascension process that starts to happen. So I decided, when I agreed with Ken to talk, I decided to create a program where we can gather, and each month we will help one of these groups of people. So November will be not just the people of, we're going to work with the people of Rosewood a little today, but the people of Rosewood, those young men who were lynched recently, all that racial violence in the country, there's so many who suffered. You need to help them. And then in January, I think it's Gaza, tens of thousands of people in Gaza, plus all these children. They all need help. The people who have died in the detainment camps, they all need help. Indigenous women who've been missing, they all need help. So I hope this isn't overwhelming to hear, because obviously there's a lot going on in our physical plane, right? In our country, in our world. But this is just another piece of healing we can do that I happen to feel drawn to. And if any of you want to come, I think it's the third Wednesday of the month, here at 11 o'clock. And we will set the container and we will do the work and we will help some of these spirits. So I invite anybody to come who feels drawn to it.